Welcome to Bill and Tony's Excellent Adventure in Music. Here are your hosts, Bill Fraser and Tony Sartu.
Welcome to Bill and Tony's Excellent Adventure in Music. I'm Bill.
And I'm Tony.
And we're going to explore our love for music by sharing some facts and our thoughts on some of the best albums of all time.
And today's album is Hot Fuss by The Killers. Hot Fuss was released on June 7th, 2004 in the UK and the following week on June 14th in the US. It's the second album that we're doing that wasn't ranked on any of the Rolling Stone Top 500 lists. The basic sales information, it has global sales of over 7 million units. 3 million of those are from the US, while 2.2 million are from the UK. So that's really kind of an interesting tidbit there about how popular they are in the UK, comparatively speaking.
Absolutely.
And then Hot Fuss, to speak to that popularity in the UK, Hot Fuss spent nearly 3.5 years on the British album chart, including 2 weeks at number one.
It's just an amazing run on that chart. So, and we can talk about the British charts a little bit more when we talk about the tracks as well. So,
all right. So tell us what was going on in 2004.
So 2004, man, Tone, we were like early 30s. This album came out basically the week that Shannon was born. So, I've just become a father of three. George W. Bush is the president. Facebook is just launched. Nintendo DS was brand new. It was just launched. Martha Stewart was going to jail. IBM sold off its PC business. And Pat Tillman tragically was killed in Afghanistan, the NFL player. So it was an interesting year, a lot going on. In the movies, it was all about sequels in 2004. The two biggest movies of the year, Shrek 2 and Spider-Man 2, was all about the sequels. We also have The Passion of the Christ by Mel Gibson, and Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban and The Incredibles kind of round up the top five. So it was an interesting year in the movies. On TV, the debuts of Lost, House, Entourage, Veronica Mars, Desperate Housewives, and Battlestar Galactica.
For the pandemic, the first show that I binged all the way back in March of 2020 was Veronica Mars.
I love that show. I did the same during the pandemic, so I absolutely love that show.
I'd never watched a single episode of it and watched the whole thing.
Yeah, me as well. And I know you were a big Battlestar fan as well. So
yeah, well, Battlestar was my Hurricane Sandy discovery in the blackout, 11 days, no power. And we fired up the DVDs of the miniseries that Rick had lent me and Carl, and we were watching them. We kept recharging our laptop so that we could watch the next disc on Battlestar.
I've never watched it. I'm gonna have to stream it somewhere.
Oh, it's so fracking good.
All right, and the number one show in the country that year was CSI, and it's just amazing staying power. The other thing about TV is you saw two big finales in 2004. Friends aired its final episode on May 6th, and Frasier aired its final episode on May 13th. And on Jeopardy, the longtime winning contestant, who is now a Jeopardy host, Ken Jennings, ended his really successful run on Jeopardy. In sports, the Patriots won their Super Bowl, and the music tie-in there is that was the Janet Jackson halftime show.
Unbelievable. What a canceling that happened to her for something she really had nothing to do with. Ridiculous
how she was canceled over something that is like a non-event now. And it's because, she was an African-American woman and how she was treated. It was absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. In baseball, the Red Sox won their first World Series since 1918. And Lance Armstrong was in the middle of his run of winning Tour de France's, which were subsequently vacated. But he won his sixth consecutive Tour de France that year.
Well, I see that Barry Bonds hit his 700th home run.
Very performance-enhancing drug year, though. You got Lance Armstrong, and Barry Bonds both like breaking records, right? So
I was just thinking about Pujols hitting 700 just last week.
I went the other direction. So
yeah, I guess that's the optimist in me.
Yeah, I guess I'm glass half empty. So I think that wraps up the year pretty good in what was going on, Tone.
All right, well then I'll talk about the year in music. I'll start with the usual segment on the number one albums from the year. So Similar to our last show with, what was that, 1998?
It was.
We had 29 different number one albums during the year. The top seller for the year was Usher with Confessions, and he also had the most weeks at number one, 9 weeks over 3 separate stints. The longest run at number one was 6 weeks, 6 consecutive weeks for Norah Jones with Feels Like Home, which was the follow-up to her monster debut, Come Away With Me. Other number ones of interest, you had big sellers with Eminem's Encore and U2 and How to Dismantle an Atomic Bomb. Country is still super relevant, maybe even more so with the rise of patriotism, with the war in Iraq and all that, and country music sort of co-opting the rights to be patriotic. So George Strait, Kenny Chesney, Alan Jackson, Tim McGraw, and Rascal Flatts all had number one albums. And I'm going to get to this when we talk about number one hits or the top singles of the year, but Ashlee Simpson had a number one album with Autobiography, and that includes a big hit called Pieces of Me, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And then finally, Green Day's American Idiot was number one for 1 week. Although it was only number one for 1 week, it has sold 12.5 million albums. And this too, I'm going to circle back to in our later discussion.
All right, fair enough. I definitely have more to say about both of those. So absolutely, I think that sounds perfect. Just a couple other notables that I would call out to. So Kanye West, The College Dropout, was a great album. Say whatever you want about Kanye, and I don't have anything good to say about Kanye, but the album is a great album. The other 3 albums that I would mention from 2004, Franz Ferdinand, and that album has a very similar feel to the album that we're doing today, Hot Fuss. It's just the Glaswegians with maybe a little less Vegas polish to it. And that Take Me Out song would almost fit perfectly on Hot Fuss. And Gwen Stefani, and I remember that album vividly because my daughters all loved Hollaback Girl. The other one that I would mention is Daddy Yankee. And I have to say Daddy Yankee, that album Barrio Fino, because Tone, do you know who used Gasolina as his walk-up music from Daddy Yankee?
Well, we're talking about 04. You mentioned the Red Sox and the Yankees. I feel like it's got to be a Red Sox, so it's a hitter. It's got to be Big Papi.
No. Big Papi used Biggie. It was a Yankee. It was Jorge Posada used Gasolina as his walk-up music.
Oh, all right. There you go. Is this going to be a recurring segment, walk-up music?
You've opened the door, so I figured I'd keep it rolling.
All right. Well, I'll continue with the top singles, and the number one song for the year was "Yeah" by Usher. And I have to tell you, it's been, 18 years since that came out or more, and I still hear Dan Schwartz in my head singing every single word to that song every time we'd play golf that year. And I'd look at him, I'd say, how do you know all the words to this stupid song? And he just had it. So, Danny, yeah, for you.
Well, I mean,
number 2.
That was a good album, though, Tone. I mean, it is a really crazy good hip hop album. It is off the charts raunchy hip hop, though. Like Usher is like all about crazy, sexy, smooth, cool, and it's like the kind of raunchy hip hop.
Well, then I guess is that one that you're going to try to make me listen to?
It is definitely an interesting album to listen to. Yes.
All right. The number 2 song for the year was Burn, also by Usher. Then we've got If I Ain't Got You by Alicia Keys and This Love by Maroon 5. Some other notables are The Reason by Hoobastank. That was number 6.
I have to stop you there because whenever that song comes on the radio, I sing every single stinking word of that song. This song is just an earworm, an absolute freaking earworm.
Well, I think of something related but different. I think about the riff off in Pitch Perfect and the winning a cappella group won a microphone used by Hoobastank. So that's my that's what I think of. I try not to think of that song. It's pretty irritating. Number 8 was Hey Ya by Outkast. The 19th top song for the year was My Immortal by Evanescence. We've got White Flag by Dido at 36. And then we've got Pieces of Me by Ashlee Simpson at 39. So I mentioned that earlier. It seemed like you had something to say. Any thoughts on Ashley Simpson?
Well, the Ashley Simpson, I remember watching that SNL episode when she sang, and well, she didn't really sing, right? So it was a whole big, huge thing because she performed on SNL, but it was very clearly lip syncing.
So do you want to hear her take on what happened?
Sure.
So she sang Pieces of Me, and she'd been sick supposedly earlier in the day. So they had what they call a guide vocal or a guide track just to sort of help her singing or, sort of add some power to it, I guess. You can call it lip syncing, but if she's singing along to it and it's supposed to be sort of a backing track, that's one thing. And then what happened was, so she did Pieces of Me, and then she does the second song, and it's supposed to be something else. I can't remember what the other song was supposed to be, but they incorrectly queued up the backing track for Pieces of Me again. So she's out on stage getting ready to sing something else, and Pieces of Me comes on again. So she kind of, if you want to believe her version of it, which is a plausible story, that's kind of, it's kind of a bad rap. It didn't really affect her because the album sold tons of copies.
The album sold tons of copies. She got tons of press over it. I was watching it. I remember watching it. Like it was a train wreck.
Yeah. And then the last song I'm going to mention, which I can't believe is only number 48, is Toxic by Britney Spears.
With the taste of your lips, I'm on a ride. You're toxic, I'm slipping under. Taste of a poison paradise. I'm addicted to you. Don't you know that you're toxic?
And, we're not doing this on video, so Bill actually is doing a whole dance routine too, and it's kind of hot. But seriously, Toxic, I'm surprised it's so low because, Britney is Britney, and that might be like, besides One More Time, that might be her song.
Such a cool song. Such a cool song.
So those are the top singles for the year.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk about our personal histories with the Killers and Hot Fuss?
So I'll say that my personal history in 2004 with the Killers and Hot Fuss was pretty much non-existent. Obviously when Mr. Brightside became popular, famous, played all the time, great song. I knew it. When somebody told me was on the radio all the time, I knew it, but I didn't know the rest of the album, and I didn't really know them very well. And that's changed over the past month because I went to see them in concert with Olivia. They were phenomenal. I've listened to this album. I've listened to most of their discography. I've listened to this album probably like 37 times. Absolutely love this album, but I don't know how I missed it. Like I keep coming back to maybe a recurring theme of like I feel like I was locked in on certain types of things, and I didn't have my eyes open to things that I really enjoy now. So I'm really glad that we're doing this together and we're listening to all this different stuff. I love this album.
So I'm kind of similar. I definitely wasn't tracking this at the time it came out, but I have a theory as to why, and it goes back to a little bit of what you were saying with the Franz Ferdinand of it all. They sound like The Strokes. They sound like Franz Ferdinand, which came out 6 months before this album came out.
Very much so. Yep. Agreed.
And because it's all, you could make the argument fairly that it's a little derivative. It just sort of blends into the background of, oh, I guess this is just what everybody sounds like now.
It goes back to what we were talking about with Pearl Jam. I agree. I think you're right.
Exactly. So I think that there's a little bit of that, where it just gets lost in the noise. And of course, the big songs, but as a band, you're just like, oh, great, they have these cool songs, but they're not anything special. They just happen to have a couple of good songs. And I think that plays out because as I've listened to the rest of their catalog and they move away from that sound, which, and I think we're going to get to this when we talk about the songs later, flat out is stealing from the Strokes, whether subconsciously or consciously.
The whole album is a very derivative work of a lot of artists. It is.
Yeah. So I think that later on, like the later songs, Brandon Flowers sings great. He's got a beautiful voice, but you don't even hear it on this album. You hear a great rock vocals, but you don't hear a beautiful voice. So I think that that's why they kind of got lost in the mix for me. But as far as how I came to them, what happened was it was maybe around September or so of 2021, and artists were just starting to tour again, and somehow or another, I guess in one of my emails or whatever, I got this alert that the Killers were playing a show at I think it's Franklin Music Hall, but it's one of those Philly venues. It's general admission, like 2,500 people, and this is, even though I didn't know them, I knew that they were an arena filling act. They were a festival headlining act. And I said, well, geez, I'll go see I'll go see them do Mr. Brightside in a small room, So I just got them on a whim. Didn't know any of their songs, and caught up with them and started listening and said, oh gosh, you know what? They're really good. And then the show just blew my doors off. It was just me and our buddy Bert, and we're in this tiny room seeing this enormous band. It was just a great night. Okay, so that takes us to the next segment, which is the basic album information. So we have the band, which consists of Brandon Flowers on vocals and synthesizer, Dave Kooning on guitar, Mark Stormer on bass, Ronnie Vanucci on drums, and the album was produced by Jeff Saltzman and the band. And all but one of the tracks for the album was recorded with Jeff Saltzman in Berkeley, California, throughout 2003. All right, so what can you tell us about the album art?
So the album art is just a very basic picture of buildings, and you've got these Chinese characters on top of the buildings, and the characters basically translate to construction material development. And at the very top, you've got Hot Fuss in bold print, and that's the album.
I have no idea what that's all about.
I don't either. I mean, it's interesting, but I can't read too much into it.
All right, so why don't you tell us about the artist's background and the lead up to Hot Fuss?
All right. So Brandon Flowers was born in Vegas, and he kind of shifted between Utah and Vegas during his early life. His musical influences were really a lot of UK artists, the Smiths, Oasis, U2, the Beatles, and he was always somebody who was working hard as a young guy. He really was trying to hustle and work different jobs and whatnot. And he worked at a golf club, and he worked scrubbing clubs. He was always around golf. His family were golfers. He was always around golf clubs. And he met this guy named Trevor at the first golf club that he worked at. And Trevor kind of had him start dreaming a little bit, because Trevor had these big dreams of being a movie guy and a band guy. And it kind of got Brandon Flowers thinking, hey, you know what? If this guy can think about it, maybe I can do something. So it kind of got it into his mind. So the story of the Killers themselves as a band started in really 2001 in Vegas. And Brandon Flowers decided he was going to try to start that band. And he started looking for people, and he was looking for people any way he could. He was looking at classified ads. He was looking at bumper stickers on cars and stopping people on the street and saying, hey, do you play an instrument? Like, he was really looking for a group to surround himself with to really become a band. And eventually he finds this Musicians Wanted ad in one of the local Vegas weekly free magazines. And it's from a guitarist, Dave Kooning, who is hoping to also launch his own project. And what stands out to Brandon Flowers is the fact that he lists his influences were the Beatles and Smashing Pumpkins and Oasis. And Brandon Flowers is like, that sounds like a match for me. So why not? I'll give it a shot. So he reaches out, they get connected, and they hit it off fairly well. And almost immediately they start collaborating. So they start writing music together. And fairly early on, they're writing Mr. Brightside. Like, they're basically, weeks into knowing each other, and they're writing Mr. Brightside. And they're starting to do gigs. And one of the early gigs that they did was right across the street from UNLV, this open mic night at a coffee house. They played 3 songs. They played the infant version of Mr. Brightside, which actually I think you can find on YouTube. And if I can, I'll share it to our social media accounts. And it's amazing, the fact that these guys just got together and they've got this song that becomes this just ginormous song, and it came together just so quickly between the two of them.
So what's that remind you of?
It reminds me of
Alive,
Pearl Jam
Pearl Jam.
Alive. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's when you connect and like it hits, right? So very similar vibe to that. And basically, Flowers really felt like the first show went terribly. He's like, I was awful. I felt like I was going to throw up on stage, and he didn't think he was good enough to be a lead singer. But they kind of stuck with it, obviously, and they kept doing gigs, and they were really looking for a drummer and a bass player. And part of the problem for them was the sound that they were going after was very different than the sound that was going on in Vegas at that time. It was very much nu metal and emo rock, and bands like Alien Ant Farm and the Deftones and Limp Bizkit, and they were getting kind of mixed results from gigs that they were doing. So eventually, they connect with Matt Stormer and Ronnie Vannucci, and they became a lineup in 2002. And they kept doing shows, and at some point in 2003, after doing a bunch of local shows, they got invited to a showcase for Warner Brothers, and they were hoping they're going to get signed, and they don't get signed. But their demo tape makes it to an indie label, and this indie label, Lizard King Records, gives them the opportunity to record, and they actually take that opportunity to record Hot Fuss on Lizard King Records, and that's actually one of the reasons why they're so big in the UK, as it was, a little indie UK label that gave them a shot.
And that makes you wonder, between their Oasis and other British acts as influences, and then recording for a British label. And I think they actually toured extensively in the UK before even releasing the album. And I just wonder if that contributed to the sounding the way it does.
I think it has to. Yeah. I mean, it very much sounds like a British band. That album sounds like a British band. Like, it sounds like a British band right from that time period.
Well, as we talk about them sounding like a British band, I was also previously saying that they sound just like the Strokes as well.
Agreed. Musically, I'm saying like kind of the vocals for me sound more like the vocals of the British band, but I think musicality of it sounds a lot more like the Strokes.
So I think that I actually hear the Strokes in the vocals too, not just the music. And I think that sound is, whether it's intentional or subconscious, it stems from the use of some vocal software, voice modulation software called Echo Farm, and they used it throughout the album, and it produces a result similar to what Julian Casablancas does on the Strokes with Is This It?, where his mic is going into an amp, and that's what creates that effect on Is This It? And I think it has a similar effect that we see here.
So I agree with you on the vocal effects that they use, but the tone of the vocals I don't. So I think Casablancas' vocals are a lot more modulated than Brandon Flowers are on Hot Fuss. Brandon Flowers' vocals on Hot Fuss for me sound a lot more like Liam Gallagher on from Oasis, a lot more.
And those were the two names I wrote down, was Liam and Julian. And what really makes me think that Strokes influence really is there, because in an interview in 2012, Flowers said that they did a bunch of songs, they had a bunch of demos on songs, and then Is This It came out, and they said, oh crap, they're doing what we are trying to do, but so much better. And they tossed everything except Mr. Brightside.
I'm glad they didn't toss it.
Yeah. All right. So I guess that was kind of leading us into something you might not know. So that would have been one of my first nuggets. So I'll give you another one. There's a group called the Sweet Inspirations, and they're like a gospel group, and they sing background on all these things that I've done, and Andy, You're a Star. And the way they came across them was they were performing at South by Southwest, again, before the album came out, but I guess they were really making the rounds, and they were getting some buzz. And they're at South by, and they meet the Sweet Inspirations, and they say, hey, do you want to come and sing with us? So backstage, they learn both all these things that I've done. They learn it backstage. They come out and they perform it with them. And then that week or something like that, they go into the studio and record it. And that's how you've got the Sweet Inspirations, who've also performed with Elvis, Van Morrison, the Bee Gees, and Jimi Hendrix. So that's some
crazy.
Pretty good company.
That is crazy. Yeah.
And then my last nugget is going to be, staying on all these things that I've done. is the origin of that song. Do you know the history or how it came about?
I know a little bit of it's tied to Brandon Flowers's religious piece, but I know a little bit of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a little bit, but really the main inspiration was Matt Pinfield. And you might remember Pinfield, besides being from MTV, he's actually from our hometown radio station.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, 106.3. And I'm going to give shouts out to the Jones family, even though I know they don't listen. We just hung out with Eddie last night, and he says he doesn't even know how to listen to a podcast. So we know Eddie's not going to be tuning in. And his wife, Erin, used to work at 106.3. So, Erin, if you happen to tune in, shouts to 106.3 and you. So, yeah, Pinfield was the inspiration for all these things that I've done. He was working for a record company at the time, and he was trying to sign them. And he goes out to Vegas. He's hanging out with them, really getting a good rapport with the band. And after a night of listening to music, they just decided to go out and hit the bars. And they were really bonding. They were telling stories about their lives. And Pinfield was talking about how he had done extensive work with soldiers. And he claims that he used the phrase, "I've got soul, but I'm not a soldier." And that inspired the chorus for this song. And that night, Brandon went home, wrote the song, and that's what we have today.
I'm curious, has Brandon Flowers corroborated that he said that?
I didn't find that in my research, but that is exactly why I couched it the way I did. But I'll tell you, Pinfield titled an autobiography all these things that I've done. So he's definitely
he's all in. Yeah. That's interesting. I did not know that one. I know the whole tie-in with his Mormon faith and whatnot, but I did not know the Pinfield tie-in. That's interesting.
All right, so what do you got?
All right, I got two good ones and maybe a couple little stragglers if there is interest. All right, so first let's start with the band name itself, The Killers. Tone, do you know how they came up with the band name The Killers?
No idea.
All right, so obviously, again, big music fans, music inspiration. So in 2001, the band New Order released a song,
Love New Order.
Crystal. The music video for Crystal is a group of teenagers lip syncing the New Order song Crystal, and the drum kit for the band, this fictional band, indicates that this fictional band is The Killers. So they basically took that moniker on, this fictional band that New Order put out. I find it's interesting that the Killers actually almost wound up calling themselves the Genius Sex Poets. And if you're an eager-eyed fan, you may have noticed that in the video for Mr. Brightside, the band, the drum kit, the Genius Sex Poets.
Oh, nice. So kind of tying it back to the origin of their band name.
Exactly. And then, I just thought that was really cool. Yeah.
Almost like encouraging another band out there.
Exactly. Somebody else pass it on. Exactly. So
I love it.
It's kind of cool.
So I didn't know. I should have, because it's actually kind of obvious now that you say it. But and we'll talk about this when we talk about the tracks. But New Order is a really good comp. I was trying to think
New Order's a great comp
of who they reminded me of. Yeah. And New Order is spot on.
Because all of the synth stuff is like completely New Order. Completely.
Exactly. That's what was bugging me. Like, as I've listened to this album, 30 times, and I'm saying, that synth is just, there's something about it that I couldn't place, and it's New Order.
Yep. No, so there's your tie-in. I got one more really good one. I got another trilogy for us, Tone. So remember how we talked about the Mama Son trilogy in the Pearl Jam episode? Well, in this episode, we're going to talk about the Murder trilogy. All right. So when they were writing the songs for Hot Fuss, they intended on having a 3-song arc of murder in their album. And 2 of the songs made it to the album, but 1 did not. So the intended arc of songs started with Leave the Bourbon on the Shelf. And this song actually didn't make it to Hot Fuss. It was released on Sawdust, which I believe was their 3rd album. And it's about a couple and breaking up. And in the lyrics, they talk about Jenny. Jennifer, tell me where I stand, and who's that other boy holding your hand, right? So it's the story of a boy and a girl, story of the boy who loves Jenny, and he's already starting to feel like something else is going on here. and they're breaking up. The second song in the trilogy is Midnight Show. He finds out she met someone else, and it is eating him up. So the narrator promises to take Jenny to a midnight show in his car, and it doesn't bode well for Jenny. It looks like she's not going to end up very well. And Jenny Is a Friend of Mine ends that trilogy, and it does not end well for Jenny, because Jenny Is a Friend of Mine is really told from the murderer's point of view, and it's really kind of telling the story of the alibi and what happened and whatnot. So you've got this 3-song arc that is really cool, and it would have been really cool if it made it onto the album, but it didn't. They've only done it in concert in that order twice, and they haven't done it since 2007. They did it in 2007 twice, and they have not done it since in concert in order. But they intended on actually making that into a little short film. They actually had like casting ideas for it. Brendan Flowers has said whenever he sees it, he sees James Spader in his head as the guy, and he's got like a whole, like they were thinking Paris Hilton. They like, because 2004 Paris Hilton was big, so like they had a whole casting in mind, and they wound up getting famous and didn't do anything with the movie.
I would argue now's the time to make the movie.
I think it would be great.
Yeah. That's interesting. So maybe that's a good pivot to the tracks.
Absolutely.
Because the first track on this album is Jenny Was a Friend of Mine. And I didn't know that. I knew of the existence of the Murder Trilogy, but I didn't know any of the backstory. And with that in mind, and then them going to instead make that the leadoff track, that's kind of strange, right?
It is, and you've got it in just this odd order. You've got the end of the trilogy as the lead to the album. So it's and the lead didn't even make it to the album. So, but
as far as the song goes, in my first listens of this album, I was struggling with, this is a good song, but you've got 1 all-timer and 3 really, really awesome anthems, and you don't lead off with one of those on a debut album. You would think that, new band debut album, start with Somebody Told Me or something else, but they start with Jenny Was a Friend of Mine. I guess maybe that speaks to the confidence that they had in the material.
I think so. But it's also interesting for me. The song's interesting. You get the radio waves and the helicopter, and then strong guitar intro. It's a really interesting intro. Like it's similar to the sounding like it's a radio in the background. We've talked about that a few times now. So it's kind of got a cool vibe to it. And it's just a great rock song. I mean, I agree. There's some all-timers on this album, but I really like the song. I think it's a good starting point. It's interesting that it's the end of the trilogy, but I actually like it as a lead off to the album.
Yeah, and some of the things I like about the song, you talked about the static opening, and that again harkens back to Pearl Jam, and the opening of 10 goes back to the Foos and Color and the Shape. Not the exact same thing, but just sort of that easing you in and then getting into it. And what I like about the song too is, you mentioned the guitar, but I actually like the marching drums.
The repetitive drum chorus. I have that exact very cool repetitive drum bit for the chorus. I wrote exactly that.
Yeah, so that's actually that, and there's the cool bass to start. So you had that cool bass to start, and then that marching drums in the chorus, and those are my favorite parts of that song.
The other thing that I think is really cool is this part towards the end-ish of the song, middle-ish of the song, where he screams the line, "I just can't take this. I swear I told you the truth." Like he screams, "I just can't take this," and then "I swear I told you the truth." Like it's just a very cool dynamic of like he's and clearly,
it all makes sense.
Yeah,
in the trilogy, when you listen to it with the trilogy in mind, then it makes sense.
Absolutely. So I love the song.
So next is Mr. Brightside. On our last show we talked about Everlong being one of those songs that'll be around forever. This song is absolutely going to be around forever.
The other thing that I get with a few of the songs on this album, and we've talked about it a couple times, is listening to it with either really good speakers or a really good headset, because of the stereo effects that they do on some of the albums. It's just so damn cool when you listen to it with great speakers or a really good headset, where you get like it's starting on one side and it's layering it on the other, and the way that they layer the sounds together. That opening is so damn cool.
So we're talking about how this song is going to be around forever. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was. It has been around forever. So actually,
Yeah.
like you're opening up exactly going back to the charts that we talked about. So you talked about the album charts. Let's talk for a second, Tone, about the song charts. Do you know that Mr. Brightside is still on the UK song chart? It has been on the UK song chart. It didn't chart great when the album first came out, but for the last 6 years and 5 months, it's been on the top 100 UK Billboard chart still to this day.
That's crazy. Back in the day when, Dark Side of the Moon was on the album chart, that was one thing. But for a single song to be in the top 100,
The longest charting song in UK chart history, over 330 weeks.
that's crazy. Well, then that even makes it more odd what I experienced on the Rutgers Sports message board. So earlier this year, Rutgers played at Boston College, and a bunch of the people on the message board, they were saying about the environment at the game, and they were saying, and this song came on, and I didn't know what it was, but everyone in the stadium seemed to know what it was. And then almost the entire message board was saying, I've never heard of them. I've never heard of that song. What is that song? And then finally me and this other person were just like, where the hell have you people been? How old are you?
They have to be like 100 years old. Because there's no way if you're any kind of anywhere in the past 20 years that you have not heard that song.
Yeah, so it's a perfect rock song. And, you might have forgotten, but we actually talked about this song on our second episode, season 1, episode 2, Hunky Dory, David Bowie. Do you remember?
Oh, I remember it well.
So I'll just refresh the audience then in case you didn't hear it. But we talked about the parallels of this song, and particularly a particular stanza on this song and a song called Queen Bitch by David Bowie. Do you mind if I play it here?
Absolutely.
So that was Mr. Brightside. And then let's check out Mr. Bowie. So both just musically, it's very similar, but even lyrically, you had the cab imagery, you've got the stomach imagery.
It's a sonic ripoff. It's a lyric ripoff. It is it's a tremendous song, but yeah.
All right. So that takes us to track 3, Smile Like You Mean It.
So you get the synth and guitar open. That's you get the New Order. It is a very 80s synth pop like feel to that song. It's a cool song, and you get the really cool guitar riff, but all along you've got that very even keel vocal. Like his vocals are so even toned the whole album.
So you talked about the guitar, and for me, when I listen to this, I listen to the guitar solo, and I flat out hear the Edge. I feel like this could have been the Edge playing this guitar solo.
You're not wrong at all. Brandon Flowers has talked so much about what he was listening to when they were doing and writing this album. He was listening to Joshua Tree and All That You Can't Leave Behind. So he had U2 in his head. That's one of their influences as well.
Well, it wasn't just Brandon, because I don't think he was playing that guitar solo, but
no,
it definitely
it definitely knits together. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that I have in my notes is that this vocal, it sounds like if Billy Joe Armstrong from Green Day was pretending to be British, he would sing Smile Like You Mean It.
Well, I do think that Brandon Flowers sounds like he's trying to be British the whole album. Yes,
absolutely. So anything else?
Not on that one though.
All right. So somebody told me track 4. What do you got?
Just a banger, just a phenomenal rock song. Awesome guitar, synth, drum open. That open is, those two songs, Brightside and Somebody Told Me, are just all-time great songs. They're just phenomenal songs.
And the danger with both of them is you hear them still so much. I mean, going back to the UK charting of Mr. Brightside still, right? Those songs are so present today. There's the danger of just having had enough, and no, haven't had enough. It's
Nope.
still good.
Not at all. But again, going back to the Glaswegians, Franz Ferdinand,
Hmm.
I definitely get the "Take Me Out" with "Somebody Told Me." Those two are like
Yeah, they're
a
siblings, those
pair,
songs.
basically. Yeah.
Yeah, completely. So what I like about the song, besides it being a perfect rock song, is I think that opening is cool. That those first 20 seconds are awesome, and then throughout the rest of the song, there's just this propulsive guitar. And as I was kind of focusing on that, closing my eyes and focusing on that, I was starting to hear. I could imagine a metal take on this song, with the way that guitar works. I could imagine, I don't know, Metallica or something playing this song.
That's interesting. So when I listened to it again, like right before we recorded tonight, one of my takeaways was, that chorus has got such a great rock and roll edge to it. Like it's got so many different components. Like it really
Hmm.
just knits together so well. It's very cool.
Yeah. And my last shout out will come on this one. So today I was picking up, right before we recorded, I was picking up the kids from youth group at our church. And I had my Killers shirt on, and the youth group director said, "Oh, I just saw the Killers, last week in Madison. I know in at Wells Fargo in Philadelphia." So we're talking about the show, and Ellie's saying, "Oh, the Killers. I like that song. Somebody told me." So "Somebody Told Me" is Ellie's favorite track from the Killers.
There you go.
Now, track 5. All these things that I've done.
I've got soul, but I'm not a soldier. The opening with the repeating single piano ping is just
Mhm.
it's such a cool way to bring you into the song.
Yeah, I love that opening. And I feel like that opening verse, and maybe I'm just a sucker for musicals, but I feel like that opening verse and then the rest of the song could be the finale of a musical.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. It's an
So theatrical, right?
anthemic theatrical song. Yeah. I was reading a little bit about when they were writing the song, and Brandon Flowers was working as a bellman in a hotel, and technology was not quite as advanced as it is today. So he didn't have at his disposal easy ways to like leave himself snippets of things. So he would leave
Mhm.
messages on his friends' voicemails with like little song ideas and little clips of the
Oh,
song,
wow.
and like this song actually was knit together on a few different voicemails, pieces of it, which is pretty cool.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, the other thing for me on this one is the chorus. If you really listen to him singing in the chorus, it's Lou Reed. Like that is him basically doing his Lou Reed in the chorus. Like it is like exactly Lou Reed.
And boy, they really aren't afraid to take advantage of their success to work with their idols, because I think that they collaborated with Lou Reed a few years later, right?
Yep, absolutely. The other thing, going back to the Bowie of it, our lead singer here, Mr. Flowers, his favorite lyric from this song, he said in multiple interviews, "These changes ain't changing me." So,
Hmm.
changes. These changes ain't changing
Uh-huh.
me. Very cool.
And I think you were mentioning his struggle with his faith, right? And I think that line in particular speaks to that.
Very, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So track number 6, Andy, You're a Star.
I love the sharp, cool guitar riff opening. It's just the bam, bam, bam,
Hmm.
bam. So cool. It's just an amazing open.
What I've really grown to like about this album is they do, and you've touched on it a couple of times, is even though they have a base of the sound, they do have components of other things that they put in and into different songs to sort of mix it up a little bit.
They do, and they while they're borrowing shamelessly from all over the place. So it's just bringing this mesh of things together. The other thing that I really think, and going back to your comment about the Strokes, I think where the Killers distinguish themselves is I feel like their guitar and their music just sounds brassier and more neon than the Strokes. Like so they sound Vegas. Like they sound
Hmm.
like Vegas.
Yeah.
And that's really where they distinguish themselves.
Yeah. So, the Strokes are sounding New York clubby,
Gritty,
and
clubby New
yeah.
York. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, Andy, You're a Star. One thing that, the song is kind of weird. It's about a high school athlete that Flowers had a fixation on, and he was like kind of idolizing this guy. So that's kind of creepy, I
You're a
suppose.
star in nobody's eyes but mine. Yeah.
I mean, gosh, that line is so bizarre. But we were talking about the vocal, the modulation or whatever, and this song, you actually really can hear Brandon singing. It's one of the songs where his voice really comes through, his real singing voice. I think that he sounds great.
I think it's probably the one track on the album where he isn't as monotone. I would agree with that. Like he actually
Yeah.
shows some range on this because I think he's playing a part in most of the other songs. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of playing a part, in my notes here, and maybe I just kind of got it stuck in my head, but I felt like this too kind of could have been in a musical where you're getting introduced to either the character Andy or the
It,
stalker
it,
character in the show,
it's
and
so funny that this album isn't a concept album, but it very easily could have been. Like they
hmm
really, if with just a couple of little more ties, this completely could have been a concept album. Like if the Murder Trilogy actually made it onto the album, if they did a couple of other little things, just
hmm
not the connective tissue isn't quite there.
so hadn't thought of it, but now that you're saying it, imagine Andy is the guy talking to Jenny, and
Well,
the character singing this song, ends up being the murderer.
completely agree. Well, and then let me add one more on top of it. All these things that I've done. Okay,
Hmm.
so when they did the Murder Trilogy in concert those two times, they followed it up with all these things that I've done,
Ah.
which is like a perfect follow-up song.
Hmm. Oh, so we're gonna really beat this horse because I've got more notes on this for later. All right, so track 7 on top. I'll start. So here's what the only note I have here, and this is again, these notes, we didn't collaborate on these, was early 80s synth.
I've got 80s type songs synth exactly.
Hmm. Yeah. And it completely because there's, a ton of synth throughout the album, but this particular song, the synth is different as far as the style. It's definitely 80s
Well,
synth.
it is, but they mixed it in with a freaking tambourine. Like it's just like the way that they layer things is very interesting.
Hmm.
Like who does a synth tambourine opening? Like that's just
Yeah.
it's unique.
So the rest of the song is just, it's a solid song, but it really, what stuck out to me was the synthesizer.
Yep. No, I like I like how it builds and it becomes solid. It's a solid song. Agreed.
Yeah. Track 8, Change Your Mind.
Another one of those alternating speakers stereo openings, which is so cool. Like when artists do that well, and you've got a really good speaker system or headset, it's so cool to listen to. So you get that, and then you get the guitar and drums come in, and the keyboard and vocals. It builds the pace a bit, and then you get the chorus, and then back to the main riff. It's a good song. It's really cool.
This riff might be my favorite riff on this album. It's not the best song, although it's a great song. Actually love this song, but it's not
It is
the
an
best
awesome
song.
riff. Yeah.
But that riff
Yeah.
is really, really cool. The other thing I noted here was that another song where I got major Billy Joe Armstrong vibes.
I would agree. Yeah.
Okay, so track 9, Believe Me, Natalie. Now I just kind of assumed that this was part of the Murder Trilogy.
It's not. This is their homage to the last days of disco and kind of ending with the AIDS epidemic and whatnot. So this is just a completely separate vibe. But you get the synth, you know, opening, outer spacey feeling, and the thing for me that stands out in this song is the synth going into almost the tribal drums and then kind of the disco-y
Mhm.
feel. It's a cool song.
Well, I'll give you a preview and tell you that it's probably my least favorite song on the album. So I kind of skip it now that I've heard it enough.
Interesting.
But so now we get to track 10, Midnight Show. Now this is part of the trilogy, right?
This is part of the trilogy, and it's the song that is the second in the trilogy, and it's the tail end of the album. After you start with the end of the trilogy, you get the rock open with everybody jumping in right off the bat. It's not like one instrument, it's not one note. It's just basically there's a little slight noise, and then boom, the whole band comes in, and it's a driving beat, drive faster boy, and it's just an awesome rock song.
So I like this song too, and this is my favorite bass on the album. I think the bass line on this
I,
really stands out.
I agree. The bass line on the song is great.
So now we get to what was the last track on the original US release, track 11, Everything Will Be All Right.
So different pace to end things. It was a steady beat, much slower though, and kind of a melancholy tone.
So this is, and again, we didn't collaborate on our notes here, but to me, this would have been a great ending to the Murder trilogy. Maybe not as good as all these things that I've done, but I just thought that I had that theatricality of this album in mind. And I was thinking, you know what? They're kind of ending, this story with this song.
So I would have actually, so now that you're saying that, I hadn't connected it to the Murder trilogy, but now that you're saying that, I will jump in and say, I actually probably would have done it as the second song. Like I would have expanded the trilogy, done it as the second song after they're breaking up. No, everything's going to be all right. So I think you could have like built it and then, no, it's not going to be okay. So I think you could have like really built a story. It could have completely been a concept album around that whole premise.
I think you're right. Yeah. So maybe we should just, pitch them, send them a pitch.
I think I think we should make a mixtape and send it to Brandon Flowers and say, you should reissue a concept album, Hot Fuss, with it reordered this way and bringing in the other song from the Murder trilogy.
Oh, I just got Brandon's response. He said, "Do you think I haven't thought about this in the last 18 years, you dummies?" Thanks for the tip, guys.
Thanks, guys.
I'm going to go back and hang out with Bruce. Thanks. Appreciate it. So the other things I had, this one was the heaviest on that whole Echo Farm distortion.
100%. Yeah.
Bit. And now I think we talked earlier, we decided that we'd include the 12th track, which was on the vinyl release that wasn't part of the initial release.
It was the bonus track on the vinyl release. And it's a really cool bonus track. I mean, it's a great song. And I think it summarizes what the Killers did with this album. It's glamorous indie rock and roll. Like it's exactly what this album is.
So did you read anything about this song?
Not a lot, no, because I didn't prep for it because we until we started doing the episode, I didn't think we were going to talk about it much.
Yeah, so I didn't jot these notes because I didn't think we were talking about it either. But what I do remember in just some of my research, and once I tell you this and you go back to listen, you will not be able to not hear it. They were intentionally modeling Bohemian Rhapsody.
And
there's multiple musical parts and lyrical parts that, it's right there. It's totally Bohemian.
All right, now I'll re-listen to it after we record. So yeah.
All right. Well, that track review was a lot of fun, Bill. I think we're getting to the end of the show. What's our next segment?
All right, Tone. It's your favorite. It's my favorite. It's our song draft. And for our new listeners and for a refresher for our regular listeners, our song draft is when Tony and I take turns. One of us goes first, the other goes second, and we just alternate picks and we create a little roster, a team of songs. Tony picks half the songs from the album. I pick half the songs from the album, and we put our teams up against each other. Tony thinks he's going to pick the best team. I think I'm going to pick the best team. And we put it out on our social media feed and on the show notes. We put a link to a Google form where we ask our listeners to vote and tell us, who do you think picked the best roster of songs? And at the end of the season, we're going to do a recap of who did best on each of the episodes.
Sounds good. So who goes first this week?
So I'm sorry to say you go first because I really would have wanted to go first on this album. I was, I was so happy I got to go first on the Foos. And then I'm like, damn, I don't get to go first on the Killers. So you get to go first, Tone. Go ahead, give it to me.
Yeah, this wasn't intentional, but of course, I wanted to go first last week too. But this one, I think I'd rather go first on this one. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna go Mr. Brightside.
Yeah, somebody told me.
All These Things That I've Done, which is actually my favorite song on this album. But I couldn't.
It's my favorite song on the album as well. I couldn't pick it over Somebody Told Me, though, and I couldn't pick it over Mr. Brightside. So if you picked, basically, we had to pick the songs we picked. But that's why I wanted to go first, not because of the other two songs, because of that song.
Exactly. Me too.
Yep.
So you're up.
Now, I know technically what the right pick is here, but I know what my favorite pick is here. So I'm going to pick Jenny Was a Friend of Mine.
That would have been my next one if I didn't get the one that I'm going to take. So you are taking Jenny. I'm going to take Change Your Mind. And then I would have taken Jenny next if
Got
it
it.
was up back to me.
All right. So I'm going to take Smile Like You Mean It.
Not me too. And now I'm going to take Indie Rock and Roll.
Nice pick. I'm going to take Andy, You're a Star.
So I mentioned in the last show that what I do is when I do my first, maybe first couple of listens, I do an initial ranking of the songs. And then as I keep listening, I do my final. My first pass, Andy was the last one. And then the more I listened to it, it had definitely climbed up in my estimation. So you went Andy. I'm going to go On Top.
I'm going to go Midnight Show.
That's what I wanted. And since I already told you, Believe Me, Natalie is my least favorite, I'm going to take Everything Will Be All Right.
And I almost picked Believe Me, Natalie instead of Midnight Show, but you told me that you didn't like it, so I saved it for last.
Brilliant. All right, so to recap, I went first, and my songs were Mr. Brightside, All These Things That I've Done, Change Your Mind, Indie Rock and Roll, On Top, and Everything Will Be All Right.
And I went second, and my songs were Somebody Told Me, Jenny Was a Friend of Mine, Smile Like You Mean It, Andy, You're a Star, Midnight Show, and Believe Me, Natalie.
Well, I have to tell you, I am really pleased with my lineup here. I think I've got a good shot of pulling a victory out.
So I'm surprisingly happy, even though I didn't get all these things that I've done, which I agree with you is my favorite song on the album as well. So,
all right. So any final thoughts?
I think where I landed is I really enjoy the Killers' music. I think for all the reasons we talked about before, they just didn't hit my radar. I think Tone, what you said was spot on. I think I probably had a similar type bias to some of the Pearl Jam bias that I had, where they were kind of sound alike to some other people, and I didn't give them a chance beyond the few hits that I knew. And
yeah, when you're out at the bar or whatever, and you heard those songs, oh yeah, these are great songs.
Great songs, yeah. But I didn't give them a chance beyond the hits that I knew, and I should have. And I'm sorry that I didn't. They're a phenomenal band. They were amazing live. That show at Wells Fargo was phenomenal, and Johnny Marr from the Smiths opened up, and he was phenomenal. Just a little aside on that, Livy cracks me up because her favorite part of the show was Johnny Marr. It was like the third song in his opening set, and he ends the song, and he turns to the guys, and he goes, "Nice one." And she's like, "Such a British thing to say," and I'm like, "He's British."
What do you want from him?
But anyway, I absolutely love this album, and more to the point, I love the Killers and what they've done over the whole discography, where they've gone from this album, and the discography that they've put together, that they've built on from there, is just tremendous, absolutely tremendous. This is an all-time great album in my mind, and what they've done subsequent to that has really, for me, cemented them as one of my favorite artists.
I think that they have to overcome the bias that we had as well. Have people look past the fact that they do sound alike for the time, but really there's a lot more depth and interesting music going on in this album. And then, of course, the way they evolved from here is just fantastic. And I know I mentioned it earlier, but really, Brandon Flowers can sing, and you just don't get that on this album at all.
Well, and he's phenomenal live. Absolutely phenomenal live.
So the last segment, I guess, is the ranking on your personal chart, Bill. So where does this land?
So Tone, this cracks my top 100. This lands just below The Color and the Shape, a few notches below, at number 98 on my list of all time. And the last thing I would say is I've been listening to a lot of Brandon Flowers interviews, and one of the ones I listened to in a podcast, he was asked to sum up the Killers in one word, and he like paused and like silence for 5 seconds, and then you just hear him say neon, and and it's right. So
You're just embracing that their Vegas roots and their kind of iconic logo, right? With the show
Yep.
billboard light bulbs,
Yep.
The Killers. All right, well, that takes us to the end of the show, I guess, right?
It does. So, Tone, bring us home.
Okay, well, thank you for listening to another episode of Bill and Tony's Excellent Adventure. Our next episode is going to be Steve Miller's greatest hits.
Have you heard him?
No, that's our buddy John in Fort Worth. That's for you. You're going to have to make a contribution to our Patreon if you want to hear a show on Steve Miller. But our next album is going to be All Things Must Pass by George
This is
Harrison.
a story about Billy Joe and Bobby Sue.
Well, on Steve Miller, the kids have decided that Colleen's favorite song is Fly Like an Eagle. There's no truth to it at all, but every time it comes on, oh, hey, Mommy, it's your favorite song.
I'm sure that needles her really.
Oh, yeah. Well, don't worry. Mine is Don't Stop Believing. So they're getting us both.
All right.
Anyway, so thanks for listening, everyone.
And next week we're doing?
Already said it.
Oh, did you? All right. Yeah, next week we're doing another episode. All right, awesome. Thanks, everybody.